Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to talk about Herc by Phoenicia Rogerson. In any given year you can expect to see at least 10 mainstream Greek mythology retellings on the market, and this was one of the big ones that came out in 2023 and is now out in paperback in 2024. It caught my eye pretty much immediately as one that I really wanted to read. So as the title suggests, this tells the story of the Greek hero Heracles, or Hercules, or indeed Herc, as many of the characters nickname him. In particular, he notes during the course of the book that while Heracles is his birth name, he doesn't actually like to be referred to as Heracles because the connection that he has to Hera is something that he does not want to be reminded of. Understandable considering the trouble that she puts him through, to put it mildly. But this is the story of Hercules told not from his own perspective, but from the many perspectives of different people that he encountered and interacted with throughout his life, be it family, friends, wives and other lovers, as well as enemies. And you get many of the expected characters in here, like Megara, his half-brother Iphicles, his stepfather Amphitryon, Eurystheus, who set Hercules on his labours, Jason, who headed up the Argo and to whom Hercules was a rather annoying member of his crew, as well as some other perspectives that I didn't necessarily imagine that I would see, and which of course I will not spoil for you now. As well as these standard POV chapters, we also get supplemented with non-conventional little chapters, such as ancient Greek graffiti, doctor's notes, and letters, and this really helps flesh out the story. And it's really like we are being presented a case of Hercules and what his character was. This narrative very much portrays Hercules not in the typical heroic light, especially if you've seen any media about him, like the Disney film. I think anybody who has interacted with Greek mythology knows that Hercules isn't that heroic figure, that very sanitized Disney figure. I say all this knowing full well that I absolutely love the Disney film. I don't care if it's inaccurate, I love it anyway. But no, we know that Hercules is a much more morally grey figure, and this is exactly what this book is going to show, that he is not a hero but a character who is marred by these significant weaknesses and flaws. Even those who love him, who are closest to him, such as his family and friends, admit this moral greyness, admit that intellectually his capacity may pale in comparison to their own. There are many ways in which he is tricky, but he's not necessarily smart. And even those he loves will admit that he is a very dominating figure, and one that sometimes can provoke fear in them just due to the raw strength that he possesses. On the other hand, his enemies and those who despise him paint an even grimmer picture. To them, Hercules is not just unintelligent, he is downright idiotic. They see him as a lazy individual who is more apt to rest on his laurels than to actually put in any hard work. To them, he is ruthless, showing no level of mercy or compassion for those who stand in his way. And most damningly, they portray him with this insatiable bloodlust and him having this violent urge to kill and destroy, which is barely kept in check throughout the book. However, even in these narratives done by those who are enemies to Hercules, you can still see that this barely contained awe at his abilities. And once again, those who idolise him will clearly have plenty to admire in him. And there are plenty of times where Hercules shows this lighter, more positive side to his personality. We see many times in this book that Hercules grieves deeply those who he has killed, especially since most of those murderous rampages are induced by the goddess Hera. And he feels deep remorse for the fact that so many people who he is closest to in his life end up dead at his hands. He is a character who is straightforward, determined, persistent. He's not necessarily a compassionate character, but he can be warm and good-natured when he wants to be. And all these different narratives spin a web showing the complexity of the character of Hercules and the diverse perspectives with which he can be viewed. However, I will say some of my favourite chapters in this are ones who are a little bit more ambivalent to downright antagonistic of Hercules. I really enjoyed Eurystheus's chapters, just the contempt that he shows for Hercules. Megara's chapters, you can feel the love that she had for him, but tinged with knowing how her story ended. You can see her fighting to hold her tongue. And Omphale I just found really fun to read. This very snobbish character I just enjoyed reading about. This being said, I don't feel like every character felt very, very clearly defined through the course of these POV chapters. Almost every character in here on some level has some sort of contempt for Hercules, and therefore it's kind of hard, I can imagine with so many different characters having POVs, to be able to very clearly distinguish each single one individually and not make it feel a little bit repetitive. There were certainly some that definitely worked, and others that just seemed like a little bit of a copy-paste of previous chapters that I'd read in terms of their tone and character voice. The language utilised in this book is very, very modern. Think something like Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls. In Pat Barker's work, she employs this anachronistic language to kind of highlight the stark callousness of the attitudes of the Greek soldiers towards the Trojan women, you know, depicting them as these contemporary lads. Whereas in Herc, I would say in comparison, the language choice kind of serves to underscore the annoyance and the irritation that so many of these characters have towards Hercules. The language language serves to humanize Hercules, bringing him down a peg or two just with the language that these characters are talking about him with, as opposed to treating him like this grand untouchable spectacle, when in actual fact most of these characters just think he's a bit of an arse. And I understand that this is often a point of contention for a lot of people when it comes to Greek myth retellings. A lot of readers find the use of modern slang and colloquialisms to be quite distracting, quite jarring, or even inappropriate, with many people saying, well, they didn't speak like that back then. And to these kind of comments, my usual responses are, well, yeah, indeed. For one thing, they weren't speaking modern English back then, so what exactly are we meant to do? And also, although they may not have been using like our modern slang, it's almost certain that had these characters existed, and of course, you know, it's mythology, most likely these people did not exist, so why does it really matter? But had they existed, they would almost certainly have been employing slang and colloquial language from their own time. Personally, I don't see any issue with translating ancient stories into modern vernacular. I think it really helps to ground mythology, removing it from its high pedestal and making it more relatable to a modern audience. And this is especially true when it comes to Greek mythology, because when you delve into these stories of these heroes, gods and goddesses, you quickly realise that they are not at all grand and heroic. They are petty, they are petulant, but they're also full of personality, and they are especially flawed characters. So surely using our own flawed modern vernacular is actually a much better way of conveying their day-to-day personalities. To me, personally, using more modern vernacular feels far more authentic to these myths than using something very polished and rehearsed. You know, something that feels like it's been lifted directly from an anthology of Greek rhetoric. Because let's not forget, those are performances, not necessarily how people would have been speaking day to day. One other criticism that I do level at this book is that I do think it works far better to listen to than to read. I started reading this, you know, physically on the page, and then I did switch to audiobook from about halfway through and found myself majority listening to audiobook from that point on. Because there were times in here that, as much as I like the modern language and vernacular, sometimes it was just a little bit awkward to read, especially some of the younger characters. But when I switched to audio, I found it flowed a lot better. And I wouldn't be surprised if I found out that Phoenicia Rogerson actually spoke a lot of her writing aloud while she was writing it. Which, you know, it being Greek mythology that it's retelling, feels quite appropriate actually. A lot of these stories were told orally. And I think this is an instance where if you are somebody who sub-vocalizes while you read, you'll actually probably have a better time with this book reading it physically on the page. But I do think it's something to bear in mind. And also, something I will say, the audiobook is fantastic. It has a full cast of characters, and these audiobook narrators infuse so much personality into them in a way that sometimes while I was reading it on the page, I had a hard time being able to do. But then yourself, if you're not a fan of audiobooks, maybe you might want to speak some of these chapters aloud while you're reading them. Maybe that's a good way in for you. But yeah, overall, I had a good time with this book. As I say, definitely think there are some flaws to this book, but it's one that I was always keen to come back to. It's definitely a Greek myth retelling that has a lot of personality to it, not just because there are so many different points of view and different characters reflected in this book, but Phoenicia Rogerson's writing style is just very full of personality, and she really brings these characters to life. I think in terms of a wider audience, it might be a little bit Marmite for that reason, but I definitely had a good time with it. So there we go, those are all of the thoughts I had while reading Herc by Phoenicia Rogerson. Please do let me know if you have read this Greek mythology retelling. Alternatively, please let me know of any Greek myth retelling that you have read recently and would really recommend. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.